is Frank Raymond. He hails from South Asia, but he has had broad exposure to Western culture all his life. As such, he has an outsider's insight into the Western culture and its unique qualities. He has written a book that, among other things, talk about the distinctiveness of the Western mind. The book is Sweet Dreams and Terror Cells. The books are next to the wall on the table there. Given that the white populations are diminishing and that mass immigration is one of the causes, Mr. Raymond has studied the mass immigration phenomenon to discover the drivers and hidden motives underlying it. He will today talk about the issue of migrant inflow or invasion from Mexico and the implications of it in the context of the big picture. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Frank Raymond.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's a privilege to address you. And the subject I have, of course, is sensitive. Because whenever you talk about race in the Western world today, it becomes explosive. Just yesterday, I was speaking to a woman in the city of Coquitlam, which used to be a very pleasant green city, but due to mass immigration, it is turning into a concrete hellhole. And she was bemoaning that fact, and she mentioned at one point that the people who are flooding in have virtually replaced the white population, and she had very few people to speak to, people who would understand her mind and her soul and have the same sense of humor as herself. She did mention that at one point, but when I said that you really must sort of think of yourself as part of a wider collective, the entire white race in Canada and across the world, at that point she didn't want to talk anymore. This was this is forbidden, and she quickly apologized and scurried off. Now, at one time, of course, that wouldn't have been the case, but everything's upside down today. On CNN a couple of months ago, the question of cuckolding came up, and a cuckold is someone who lets his wife fornicate with another man. And CNN said, but cuckolding is good. It restores marriages. It makes marriages more healthy.
Is that US CNN?
US CNN. They said, why are they mockingly calling this fellow a cuckold? Cuckolding can be therapeutic and healthy. Everything's upside down. And you wonder why that is. Now, as today, mestizos, I suppose I call the people of Latin America mestizos because they're basically Amerindian people with a dash of Spanish blood. As mestizos pour across the US-Mexico border today, and there's so much controversy, the most remarkable thing is that this is still happening today in 2018. There has been a white awakening represented by the election of Donald Trump. But if it can happen after that, it's a symptom of a pretty historic decision point. If a real good resistance, decision, courage if that doesn't take place, this might end up as a last whimper by the white people who built the civilization that millions of people are rushing to enjoy and to possess. It'll end up as a kind of a wet squib with a psh. If that's so, one branch of humanity will soon die, and the world will transition downwards into an overpopulated, polluted, concrete planet that will die sooner than anyone expects. Now, as you can see, I'm not a white person, but I can I'll have to speak like a white nationalist. Now, by that, I mean that I shall speak from the viewpoint that the white race should survive, prosper, exist, and bear many generations more of white boys and girls. Now, if you said that 100 years ago, you'd be called a patriot. But today, loud and aggressive voices will shout you down as a racist. You see, there's a very able and malevolent enemy, and he has turned everything upside down, inverted everything. patriotism, the highest virtue, has been transformed into racism, the vilest crime. Now, you might wonder why I, a colored person, would be speaking for the survival of the white race. But the fact is, my life, as of so many colored people, especially in India, has been immensely enriched by the white race. So have many lives all over the world. The white race has improved the lives of people in the ways of technology, such as airplanes and medicines, and a system of law that people in Africa, say, or India, enjoy for the first time since colonialism. But that's not all. There's something, you have to ask a few questions about the distinctiveness of races. Why is it that whites restore antique cars and collectible cars and sit around in their garages for hours lovingly restoring these cars, but nobody else would do it? Let's say it might be a waste of time. Why is it that whites volunteer to work at animal rescues? I was looking at an organization called Pause for Life, where these young men and women go out and spend an immense amount of time searching under bushes, and they've heard that somewhere under that concrete drain pipe there's a mother dog with her puppies, and they try to coax it out and bring it to a shelter, but nobody else seems to do it. For example, here in Vancouver, a police dog died in the way of duty. I was fairly new immigrant at the time, and the police department decided to hold a funeral for this police dog, and they invited all the other police dogs of Vancouver to come and attend, with the result that it was the noisiest funeral in Vancouver history, with all those dogs barking away. But a lot of people turned up, and some of them were very tearful and said, "We've come here to show our respect for Rusty, this dog that's died." And one man said, "They're not just animals, they're like us, they have lives and souls." And the police officers gave a very moving tribute to this dog that had died. And they piped him in with a Scottish bagpiper and laid him to rest in a casket. Now, the interesting thing was that at the time I was working with a lot of East Indians and an African family and many Oriental families. I was a tutor. And they all thought that these whites are just plain mad. Plain mad. Absolutely loony bonkers insane. There's a lot that you folks take for granted, such as we have wonderful hiking trails in Vancouver, and there are hiking trails all over North America and Europe. And hiking in the woods, in the mountains, in the hills is a favorite pastime. But how many of you know that if you talk to the average person in India, he'd say, "Hiking trail? What hiking trail? We don't have any hiking trails." You'd be hard put to find a hiking trail in Vietnam. So there are many reasons why, many reasons why the white race should survive, not the least of which is that's the only one that cares about the earth, pollution, the future of mankind, the future of life. Many reasons. I was in Seattle not so long ago, and I had to stop at a coffee shop to ask for directions, and there was a group of people sitting and discussing, and they had their laptops. There was an older man of about 60. There were younger people. And this man was saying that there's a real problem, that there's this methane belt around the planet. And the methane belt is mainly around the equator. But if it gets any more, if it doubles, it'll be absolutely catastrophic for humanity. Well, that man didn't realize that if you went to any part of the world that was non-white, there's no one sitting around talking about the methane belt or any other belt and what it might mean 100 years down the road. So I said, yes, I had a brief talk with them, and I said, yes, it's a matter of population. The planet is getting overpopulated, and that's why there's so much pollution, but also it's a matter of the people who exist, the kind of people. White people are much more concerned about these things. They see further and think on a more universal scale, as you are doing, looking at the whole planet. And he said, yes, but you see, if someone really destroys things, and someone can be really ruthless and murderous, it'll be the whites. I thought, you don't look too murderous. I was looking at him and I said, you don't look too murderous, you look pretty tame. Like even if someone slapped you and took your house from you, you'd probably sit around, and if they took your country, they're doing it right now. But somebody, some malevolent and crafty enemy, has indoctrinated you with this idea that you are the scum of the earth. But what can I say? You're a nice person thinking about the Methane Belt. But these are fairly material things. There is something, the inner mind is touched by something deeper, something best described as spiritual. And by spiritual, of course, I don't mean religious. And there's something about those religious people, they have very grim looks about them. Maybe you can touch a little bit of it by saying there's the love of the sea. Only Caucasians seem to have this fascination with the sea, with ships. All those paintings of sailing ships struggling amid storms, of lost ships wrecked and foundered on the beach. They're seeming to reach a claw upwards in protest on some lonely beach. All those books by Joseph Conrad, those paintings of fishing boats coming home in the evening. But there is a soul there somewhere, and it needs to be explored. And what my conclusion was that whites, Caucasians do have a unique soul, and I'm saying soul in the deepest sense. And that's why, perhaps, they're alarmed at being dispossessed, colonized, surrounded by non-whites, their children forced to go to school as minorities in an alien society. There are schools in Vancouver where there's a single white Canadian surrounded by mainly Orientals. This boy is not growing up with his own people, with his own mind, with that sense of humor, that level of, that kind of intelligence. He's losing his soul, that boy or girl. But that's what's happening. Now, given that, I wondered why no one has attempted to define or at least describe the Caucasian soul. So I set out to write this book and attempt to describe that soul. I gave it a shot, and I wrote the book, but I was hoping that others would follow up and build on that work, but so far as I know, no one has. And Sweet Dreams and Terror Cells is still the only work that plumbs the soul of Caucasian man and woman. And you notice I did say man and woman. You shouldn't fall into the trap set where they keep saying it's the white man that's the problem. It's very cleverly done, this attempt to divide whites into men and women, so as to divide and rule is the age-old technique of conquerors and rulers. So the second thing I wondered about was why the hidden ones, those that I call the sneak rulers, are so implacably determined to remove white people from the face of the earth. So I wrote an exposition of that in my book, and I think it'll surprise you. You'll be pretty surprised if you found out. Now, I'm only one small person, a droplet, in this movement that is now burgeoning. This burgeoning movement to save the white peoples and their culture from extinction. And there's 1,000 rills and streams now flowing, so many speakers, so many writers. There's actually a rather large stream known as Donald Trump, a very improbable hero for the cause, a very imperfect hero. But the fact is he's president. He has a certain amount of power, and he can't do anything. Even as he speaks, the dispossession and minoritization of white people has many aspects. Feminism has done a very good job of reducing birth rates. There's an absolute determined movement to create as many homosexuals and transsexuals as possible, and there'll be less birth rates. So there's many parts to this. Some of them are almost invisible. It's very difficult nowadays to watch a movie because the movies are not movies anymore. They're now propaganda and mind master control. Very subtle messages telling white people that they're, the advertisements too, that they're cowardly people, followers, not leaders, that if a white man is strong, he's always weak, but if he's strong, he's evil. He's the crook, the rapist, the thief, whatever. So there are many aspects to it, but the most visible aspect is people coming right across the border. Like right now, they're coming right across the border. It's something that's not invisible, not down the road. It's right here. And yet, the president himself can't stop it. And the question is why? Why even today, white people are about as helpless as a rabbit facing a cobra, paralyzed, unable to stop the taking of their land, the destruction of their people. And this present invasion across the southern border provides a bit of a window into the wider phenomenon. That kind of interests me always, because there was some 25 years ago, a Mexican man came here to Canada. He came in the back of a car. He was in the boot of a car and crossed the border. And sometime after crossing the border and being an illegal, he murdered someone. Well, guess what? The Canadian state has taken him into its care. At vast expense, it's got him in a mental home. Has been feeding him all that time. And every so often he comes to court with some demand or the other, and a very highly paid lawyer goes up, and very highly paid immigration judges sit around, and so it goes on. There's just, it kind of shows you how weak your state has become in the face of all the subversion that's happened. The state is practically helpless right now. Now, of course, when he got into trouble, he instantly filed a refugee claim. And the Mexican border invasion is part of a refugee invasion that's happening all over the Western world, especially in Europe. It's a worldwide phenomenon. But what people don't realize is these things are prepared over a long time. When someone has a determined move to subvert a country or to destroy a people, they work on it for a long time. I wonder if any of you have read the book All Quiet on the Western Front. Yeah, very nice book too. I admire it. I think he's a great author. Very beautiful writing. I also happen to think that Eric Maria Remarque, the writer, was a paid subversive. And I'm not alone in thinking that. The National Socialists decided he was and wanted to boot him out, and I think they did. He wrote All Quiet on the Western Front at a time when the Bolsheviks were in high gear, in action, and they saw war and defeat in war as their way in. When a country is defeated in war, it has a sense of worthlessness, it has a sense of defeatism, despair, and above all, it's in chaos. That's when the Bolsheviks can move in. That happened in Russia. Russia was defeated, and reeling from that defeat, feeling a sense of lack of confidence in their state and their leaders, they were ripe for taking over, and the Bolsheviks did. What few people know is the same thing was happening in Germany. The Bolshevik movement was probably stronger in Germany than in Russia. In fact, they even seized Bavaria and declared a Soviet republic there. And there was a Soviet republic running for a while in Bavaria. And Eric Maria Remarque, when he wrote that book, a lot of Germans thought that this was an anti-war book written to inspire a sense of defeatism and contribute to a German defeat. That people would say, no, war is a terrible thing, in the middle of a battle for life. But Eric Maria Remarque went on to write other books. 3 of them I'll name: Arch of Triumph, The Night in Lisbon, The Promised Land. Strangely enough, all 3 were arguing for a refugee convention, for all countries to take in refugees freely. And eventually that movement got you the United Nations Convention on Refugees, which is what ties the hands of all these countries, that as soon as a refugee comes in, it doesn't matter what, now how improbable, how ridiculous, what, instantly he has to be let in, he has to be given welfare if necessary, a work permit, medical services, everything. I have an inside track into these things for a certain reason. I know that there are Bangladeshis, and I know all about Bangladesh, having lived there for a long time, who are in America, and they walk across the border and claim refugee status, And there is nothing Canada can do about it. According to this convention, they have to let them in, spend immense resources on them, and they never get to leave. How on earth can a person be a refugee to Canada if he's already in the United States, a safe country?
From Nigeria.
Sorry?
From Nigeria.
Yeah, and he's in the United States, and he comes to Canada and says, well, I like Canada better. The system is easier, the welfare is better, whatever. It's not just welfare, though. Now, the abuses basically are beyond belief. So the UN Convention on Refugees is one prong of the legal pitchfork. There's another prong, it's called birthright citizenship, meaning if you're on the land and you bear a baby, that baby becomes as much instantly a citizen, and that's why you have anchor babies all over the place. Once you've invaded the land and set foot on it, you have a child, he has as much right to the land as a sixth-generation descendant of the pioneers who came over on the good ship Mayflower. And the third prong is the granting of legal rights to aliens, a difficult subject to understand, but basically, most of the Supreme Courts of these countries have decided and ruled that any alien, as soon as he sets one toe onto the land, just by the act of setting his foot on the land, he has all these rights. And today, Tucker Carlson, I see, of Fox News, the Tucker Carlson show, was speaking yesterday very indignantly of illegals are getting onto the school boards now. Illegal immigrants are now being given the right to go on school boards, and in Maryland, they can vote in any state election. But it goes further than that. When Donald Trump wanted to keep out not give visas to certain countries, there was a hullabaloo that went straight to court. They said, you can't discriminate against people. So people who haven't even set foot on your land are claiming rights on it. So, of course, is an essential part to securing your country is to say no alien has rights in our country and never will have. Because once you give one little bit, the rest will follow. Now, sometimes these prongs come together. Recently, I know of a case of 2 students who came as students, visa students. And then, after the first term, they weren't paying their fees, and the government said, well, we are canceling your student visa. And guess what? They promptly filed refugee claims. How can a student be a refugee if it takes a year to even get the visa? So how could he be running around in fear of his life? But after 6 months as a student, he's suddenly a refugee, and they have to hear the case and spend tens of thousands of dollars. But then the birthright part came in. That was a man and a woman. They decided to have a baby, and now you can't do anything about it. Once they have that baby is Canadian, and a right to the land ensues. Interesting. Now the question is, it's rather simple, don't you think? Donald Trump keeps talking about these people flowing across the border, but he never says that it's legal. They can come. Any number of the millions of them could come and just claim refugee status. And he says things. He says, we don't even have an immigration system. Look, the minute anyone comes in and puts one toe into our country, we are stuck with a 5-year lawsuit. But he could propose that we, the US, will have to pull out of the UN Convention on Refugees. He or the other lawmakers could propose that the birthright citizenship, you give birth on the land and then you have a claim to the land like any colonist, and you don't even have to fight for it like the Vikings had to fight for Britain. No, that has to stop. No one proposes that. And as for giving rights to aliens, no one seems to propose to stop that, saying, no, nobody should have rights until they're our people. So why is these things not happening? Well, these are laws, but laws are the products of a political situation, of the ideology of the society, of the mentality of the people. What is a law? It's just a set of rules. Until you change the mentality and the political dynamic, you won't get these laws that you need. It's not going to happen. And what is the problem? Well, the problem is what you evade, what you don't dare to confront. I used to listen to this man called Lou Dobbs. Now, Lou Dobbs was on CNN for a long time, and then he shifted to Fox News because CNN turned much more radical and leftist. So Lou Dobbs was no longer welcome. But while at CNN, he transformed his financial show, his business show, and he transformed it into a show on immigration. And he was waxing indignant and furious and lengthy about illegal immigration. All this illegal immigration, mainly from Mexico. Well, at one point, someone once said something about some Mexican, I said something about race and said, you people are a bunch of racists. And he said, I'm very disappointed and disheartened that you mentioned race. And the next day, someone pointed out to him that some Mexican was saying, compadres, keep going, cross the border, let's do it and complete the Reconquista. And Lou Dobbs said, well, that's very interesting. Now, that was the problem. Lou Dobbs was talking about a rule book, a rule, a law. Illegal immigration is a problem. Well, gee, they can make it legal tomorrow. In fact, right now it's legal. They're now, instead of just crossing, they're saying, I'm claiming refugee status. Here it is. It's talking about illegal immigration is a bit of stupidity. It's the act of a coward who doesn't say, this is my problem. And he said, my problem is it's against the law. Well, gee, that law can change. If Hillary Clinton had become president, she had committed to a bunch of bankers in Brazil at a meeting in Brazil. She had committed to a hemisphere-wide, single, open border, unitary political, one political unit reaching from South America to the northern frontier of the United States. She said, that is my dream. One borderless state, right, zone. She would have changed the laws, and then Lou Dobbs and today Tucker Carlson would be left gasping like fish. Well, it's not illegal anymore. What are you yelling about? Tucker Carlson keeps saying, if you're illegal, you can't demand this, you can't demand that, and you shouldn't have sanctuary cities because it breaks the law. You can't have the law being broken. We're a country of laws. Then he says other things, like he's the strongest voice. That's why I mentioned Tucker Carlson. He's the strongest voice in the mainstream media. And he can't mention race or his race. He says the Democrats are doing this because they want to bring in voters who will continue their socialist policies, voters who will want welfare and state-funded Medicare, and so they want to stay in power forever. Well, that's not the truth, and that's not Tucker Carlson's problem. Tucker Carlson's problem is that he's a white American, and his people are being dispossessed. And these are aliens, and he can't even say that. The final bit of cowardice is this obsession with crime and murder. Even Donald Trump seems to not get past that. What's the problem with this mass immigration? Especially it's the illegal immigration. They say that's fine, illegal immigration's fine, you can't deport them unless they commit a crime. Well, gee, I thought it was a crime just to be illegal, but now it's come to the point that even an illegal immigrant is now fine. Even an illegal immigrant fine. It's only when he commits a crime that you can deport him. So Donald Trump will talk about Kate Steinle, who got murdered by some illegal immigrant. He'll talk about the crime rate. Even day before yesterday, he said the big problem with there'll be illegal immigration and there'll be crime instantly. We'll no longer have safe cities. Now, illegal immigration is not the issue. Crime is not the issue. Immigration is not the issue. Race and nation are the issues that they're too cowardly to say. So why not just say it? My race does not have, I'm a white American or I'm a white Canadian. We conquered this country. We were pioneers. We were settlers. We built all this. We built a nation. George Washington and the founding fathers were not mestizo and they were not Filipino. This is our country. But my people we are like the Kurds of today. The Kurds, by the way, are people in the Middle East who don't have a country. There are some of them in Iran, some of them in Iraq, some of them in Syria, and they've been kicked around and bullied and by all these countries, Turkey especially. white Americans and white Canadians will be the Kurds of the future. So they could say, we don't have a land, a town, a street, a school, a community center. We want to live among ourselves, see people like ourselves, look into the eyes of fellow whites and feel that enriching community of our people of our soul. But they can't say that because it's forbidden under the present system and they don't want to buck that system. Whites can't even have a golf club or a church of their own, but other people can. Just last week I was walking down this street called Nelson, where there's a Korean church, and I heard this music and I thought, well, that music is rather nice. My son and I were walking and I wanted to go in, and there was this Korean woman and she stops us at the doors in a fussy way saying, Korean, Korean. I said, I heard the music and I just wanted to see who's playing it and just want to listen to the music. It's rather nice. No, Korea, Korean. There was a fussy way about it, but she was very clear. This is for Koreans only. Aliens unwelcome. Now, no white could say it. 60 years of mind control have done a pretty good job. To see what is missing, you have to see what is evaded in a cowardly fashion. Now, Trump speaks at rallies in Iowa and Ohio and Maine to the heartland.
One more minute.
Okay, well, I'm not going to get through this, but I'll just say, I've got 1 minute and I'll have to end there. He speaks some obvious truths. He says, the wonderful people of this state who heroically built all these farms, that was hard work, that was labor, hard-working people, honest people, the salt of the earth. And of course, he's saying to them that you're good people, you're nice people. That's not something they've heard. For 60 years, they hear, in various ways, sometimes very subtle ways, through movies, through ads, that you're a trash people, you're the slave owners of the earth. You're, in the movies, they are the cowards, the rapist, the thief. The black guy rescues the girls from the cruel and cunning fellow who abducts them and tortures them in some dungeon. So they're hearing from Trump the exact opposite of what the universities are saying. The universities teach constantly white privilege, bad whitey, and they hear something from Trump, but Trump even can't say, we white people or you white people. He says, no, I say to the black people, what have you got to lose? You have crime, you have slums, you have poverty, I will fix it. What have you got to lose? Vote for me. He says to the Latinos, I will put aside $20 billion for the uplift of the Latino community. But he cannot ever say that I'm speaking to you white people. And there is no white person or politician who will ever say today, we white people as a community, we have interests. Now, people who does not dare to speak its own name is a people that's already too cucked to survive. I had a lot more to say, but there's no time.
So we will break for coffee for 20 minutes, but if people have questions, this can actually continue during the coffee break. Any question?
I would like some coffee.
Yes, sir. Sir, I was curious as to you seem to assume a static view of culture, that it would not change based on generations of people coming to the U.S., but it seems that that experience proves otherwise. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Now, I have to be clear what you mean by a static view of culture.
That people's values do not change when they enter a new community.
Well, what is happening is that they're changing the values of these communities. It is not, you've got this assumption that we are the big bad majority, there's only a few of them, and we can make them speak with American accents, and nothing will change, that they will become American in spirit and so forth, nothing will change. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is they are changing the culture and not always to the better. I can give you a specific example if you like. that happened only last week.
I live in Arizona, and I can give you quite a few counterexamples.
Yeah, I'm sure, but that is not the point I made. The point I made was that your people will not walk the earth. If the Chinese can have China and Mexicans can have Mexico, why can't you have a country of your own? Why does your country have to be the property of everybody and you have to be dispossessed? That was the point.
I guess my understanding of America was that it was based on a set of values, not on...
I understand you, sir. I understand you. In fact, the other day, people who were pontificating on CNN and MSNBC that America is an idea. Well, that's the state you've come to, that a country is no longer a country, it's now an idea. However, if you looked at are you American?
Yes.
Well, if
I'm
you...
Arizona.
Well, are you American?
I'm Arizona.
Well, that's not a country. If you looked at your own history, you would find that the founding fathers wrote a constitution in which they said, we are writing this for our posterity. I don't think that they would consider the Chinese students prowling around here as their posterity. Secondly, the founding fathers did write an immigration law only 6 years after writing the Constitution. And you know what that immigration law said? Immigration is restricted to free white persons. By free, they meant not indentured.
Adams also had strong censorship laws.
There is one more question actually here.
Yes, real quick. So who is behind this and why?
Okay, the people behind it are the most powerful people that are there, and they can certainly punish you and punish me. Okay? So naming them is dangerous. However, I can say to you that they have a very strong sense of ethnicity. They know the value of ethnicity because they've been practicing it for a long time. So they know that when you destroy that, they know something, that an ethnicity is on a land, it forms its own government and its own community. That's what's called a nation state. If you can break up the nation state, if you can multiculturalize it, mongrelize it, put it as part of the EU or the European Union or some multinational body, you can rule them. So who are they? It's very dangerous to name them, but it is the people who make the movies that inculcate the sense of worthlessness in whites. They make the ads. It is they who made the 1965 Immigration Act. It is they who wrote things like Susan Sontag wrote, "The white race is the cancer of human history." Do you know that? Well, look it up. Susan Sontag wrote in the Partisan Review, "This, for all its achievements, the white race is the cancer of human history. It and it alone is responsible for the destruction of the planet, the massacre of nations," and so forth. It is the people who control the media and now have completely changed the educational system. The educational system of today, a humanities course at a university in the Western world is a propaganda course against the white race. We can look at specific examples if you like, but
There is one more question.
yes, sir.
I'm from Vancouver, and you're absolutely right. Canada is the only country in history that's changed the population culture without a war. And I witness it every day in Vancouver. I feel like I'm a minority in the city. I live in West Vancouver, and there's two cultures over there that are becoming dominant. There's the Persian culture and the Chinese culture, and nobody assimilates. You walk down the street, nobody says hello to each other. They're afraid to do that. You go to the restaurants I go to are all white people in the restaurants. The Chinese restaurants are all Chinese people. And you're absolutely right. The culture is changing. This is not, Canada in 20 years will not be Canada anymore. It'll be a mishmash of tribal communities separated and that do not assimilate, that don't talk to each other, and they'll all speak their own languages and have their own religions, and there will be not one culture anymore. That's happening in front of me.
Yeah, yes, sir. But you have to understand that while you're completely right, the point is that these very powerful people, very able people, the sneak rulers are very able. They have two goals, two big goals. One is to genocide and replace the white peoples, replace them on the land, because they prefer to have colored peoples. And the other is to have a strong base in the Middle East, which is why there are all these Middle East wars to rule it from. Now, their goal is not about culture. It's not about anything else. Their goal is to colonize these lands with alien peoples, dispossess you. The real issue is you are being dispossessed of your land and your community, and in the process they have to brainwash you and tell your kids that they're criminals, of course. They have to tell them that. Yeah. So the central issue is, will you have a land, and you're being dispossessed of a country, of a land where your people and only your people live, and therefore can develop your soul, state of mind and culture.